I've been in touch with your party leader this morning on that issue and around that point. We do have a very important and a very sensitive cabinet meeting that will happen in London starting at 2 o'clock today, and I don't want to say anything here today that might upend that cabinet meeting, make things any more difficult than they are already for the Prime Minister, and I know that you won't want to put me in a position where I have to do that. What I can say at the outset, once again, is that Brexit is not our policy. Brexit is not going to be good for Ireland. The best case scenario for Ireland would be for the United Kingdom to remain in the European Union, but that is not a matter for us. That is a matter for the British people, a matter for the British Parliament, and they've made their decision, and we must respect it. So our objective from day one has been to minimise any harm to Ireland and Northern Ireland, and to maximise any opportunities that may arise. And our strategy from day one was to be European, to be very much one of the 27, to be indivisible from the other 27 member states, to ensure that the European Union understood our concerns and our vital national interest, and to make sure that our concerns and our vital national interest became European concerns and European interests. And I really feel that Michel Barnier and his task force and his team have very much taken that on board, as have my colleagues in the European Council, the Commission and the European Parliament. So back in December, when the joint report, the agreement between the EU and the UK, was issued, I said that the next step was to turn that joint report that we agreed back in December into a legally binding and legally operable withdrawal agreement. And we are close to that point today. But it is still a draft agreement. It is yet to be agreed by the UK government, and they will discuss that this afternoon, and is yet to be agreed by the European Council. And we may be in a position to have an emergency European Council meeting before the end of the month to do exactly that. In terms of your questions, my reading is that the Good Friday Agreement is not negatively impacted by this. In fact, it is protected by the draft agreement. And in relation to the transition period, and I think you asked about the transition period is envisaged to run from the end of May next year until the end of 2020, with the possibility of a time-limited extension of the transition period. But during the transition period, the United Kingdom would not be a member of the European Union, but essentially the rules and regulations and so on and the acquis would apply, thus giving business and citizens time to prepare for any permanent changes that may take place, and more importantly giving us time during that transition period to negotiate the future relationship between the EU and the UK around trade and around security.
Thank you. Taoiseach, can you confirm that the agreement will be made available to this House and that there will be vigorous debate in this House? Secondly, as you said, we've had 12 months of discussion around last year's agreement, and within that discussion there was tortuous interpretation of language, and language in London meant something completely different in Dublin and vice versa, and also in Brussels. Is the language in this agreement watertight, that it will not be subject to another 12 or 24 months of interpretation and disagreement, and difficult disagreement between our nations? Secondly, could you give a guarantee that this agreement will be time-proof, that no matter who is Prime Minister, or indeed who is Taoiseach, that the commitments in this agreement will be honoured, no matter how long this agreement lasts for? And finally, Taoiseach, in the event of this agreement not being reached, particularly if it doesn't get through the Parliament, can you confirm that, in line with the contingency advice of the EU Commission about preparation for a no-deal Brexit, that you are satisfied that we are in a situation to deal with such a scenario?
My apologies, Deputy. I think I said that the transition period, implementation period, would kick in from the end of May next year. It's, of course, the end of March. If this agreement is made, it will be an international treaty between the European Union and Ireland, including Ireland on the one hand, and the United Kingdom on the other. And therefore, being an international treaty, would continue to apply even if there was a change of government here or a change of government in the United Kingdom. And that is the nature of such agreements. In terms of the process and the next steps, obviously a lot of things can go wrong today and over the next couple of days. But should the UK Cabinet be in a position this afternoon to say that it's content with the text, it is proposed that the Commission Task Force would be in a position, perhaps tonight, to publish the text, with the possibility or probability of an EU Council meeting around the 25th of November. The text would have to be ratified, as we all know, by Westminster and also by the European Parliament. But while it is not legally necessary, it is my strong view and the Cabinet's decision today that the text should also be put to a vote here in Dáil. And I can give that commitment this afternoon. I do appreciate that members will want to read the text, so we may need some flexibility around timing. And it's intended to offer briefings to all of the parties here this evening, if we're in a position to publish the text, give you time to read it. We've arranged for briefings with the Northern Ireland parties tomorrow morning, or at least those who wish to be part of that briefing tomorrow morning. And then, all things going to plan, to have a debate perhaps next week. And this can be agreed by the Business Committee, thus allowing everyone to have a chance to read this in full, think about it, and then have a vote in the Dáil as well.
Taoiseach, yesterday the draft Brexit withdrawal agreement was agreed between the EU and British negotiators, and after all the machinations of the past year and a half, all the toing and froing and all of the false starts, I want to welcome the fact that we might have a suitable deal on the table. I say might, Taoiseach, because obviously we haven't seen sight of the text of that deal, but we are hopeful that a deal which meets what we in Sinn Féin have consistently called for might be on the table, and we'll wait to see the detail of such. From the beginning of this process, we've consistently called for a special deal for the North of Ireland, reflective of the North's unique status, reflective of the vote that was cast in the North, and one that ensures that no hard border on our island, one that ensures that citizens' rights would be protected and ensures that the Good Friday Agreement in all its parts would be protected and upheld. And we've put that case at home and abroad. We have urged you to promote an all-Ireland view when it came to this approach, and that is what has guided our approach in Sinn Féin. We've not sought to play party politics with any of this, and I'm sure you will acknowledge that, as you have in the past and as your Taoiseach has also. We've rightly called you out when we thought you were on the wrong track, but we've been supportive of you when we have assessed that you were on the right one. And one of the core issues, Taoiseach, is the issue of the Irish backstop, which in our view remains the bottom line in ensuring that there is never a hard border on the island of Ireland, that the interests of citizens are upheld and that the Good Friday Agreement in all its parts is protected. And that protection remains absolutely vital, and the British Government must be held to the commitment they made last December. Perhaps some sense will prevail in Downing Street this afternoon, and I hope that is the case. The DUP, for their part, are already out of the traps opposing what is potentially on the table, and that doesn't surprise any of us on this side of the House. In opposing any positive solutions, they have aligned themselves with the most right-wing elements of the Tory party, the UKIP and the extremist Brexiteers, and moving from an initial position of wanting no hard border on the island of Ireland to actively, it now appears, seeking one. In my view, they're living in a fantasy land when it comes to Brexit. They don't have an idea what's on the table, but what they do know and what they're certain of is that they're against it. And I believe that this is absolutely reckless and it's an irresponsible position. There is an onus on all of us to defend our country's political and economic interests, and that should be the position of everybody in every part of our island. And there is now an onus on the British Government to step up to the mark, as I've said. Last week, Taoiseach, you told the Dáil that you will not resile from the fundamental position that there must be a backstop as part of the withdrawal agreement, that backstop cannot have an expiry date or a unilateral exit clause. Taoiseach, can you outline that this is still the case? And can you give some detail on when you intend to bring the party leaders together so that they will be fully briefed on the contents of this detail as much as can be possible. And finally, can I say, and can I make the point that it's important that happens without delay. The Sinn Féin leadership, our priority President, Vice President, will be speaking to Theresa May after 5 o'clock this evening, and I think it's important that there is a briefing from an Irish perspective before that opportunity arises.
Our intention, again, all things going to plan, is to offer a briefing to the party leaders and their teams this evening, and to offer a similar briefing to SDLP Alliance and the Northern Ireland Green Party tomorrow morning. When it comes to the backstop, I think it's always important that we remember what the backstop is. The backstop is not our preferred solution. It is a fallback. It is an insurance policy. So if you go back to the joint report in December, we had option A, option B, option C. Option A is resolving the issue of the Irish border in a new future relationship between the EU and the UK. We will try to negotiate that during the transition period. Option B was to be UK-wide specific solutions, but in many ways that is now the potential for an extension of the transition period if needs be. Option C, and it has always been option C and is still option C, is the backstop, which would only kick in if option A and option B were unsuccessful. So the backstop does have to be there. It does have to be legally operable. It can't have an expiry date, and it isn't going to be, and it can't be possible for any one side to withdraw from it unilaterally. But it is important to appreciate that it is our intention that the backstop should never have to be invoked, and if it is invoked, it should only be temporary until such a time as a new agreement is in place to supersede all or part of it. But it must apply unless and until that is the case.
Thank you, Taoiseach. You mentioned that, in your view, that the Good Friday Agreement is protected in relation to the draft agreement, and that is to be welcomed, and we will examine in detail when we have the published text just how that stacks up. In relation to the guarantee of the backstop being permanent, can I ask you, can you outline to the House the nature of any potential revisions to the backstop following a review, and what would be the role of this Parliament, who you've outlined will vote on the agreement at a later stage? Will there be consent necessary for Ireland in relation to any changes to the backstop? And can I ask finally, in relation to the briefings, and I welcome the fact that there are briefings to take place with party leaders, but let me just emphasise again, it is important that they take place in a timely manner. I think it would be, given our role and the opportunities that we've had dealing with the British Prime Minister, with negotiators at a European level, in advocating the Irish position, that a briefing from an Irish perspective is important to take place before that opportunity arises for us after 5 o'clock today to speak with the British Prime Minister, Theresa May. And I think, in terms of scheduling, that you should take that into account.
There is, it's again important to point out that this is, if we are able to make this agreement, it will be an agreement between the EU and the UK. Ireland is part of the EU, but will not be signing up to the agreement separately. It's an agreement between the EU and the UK. But any changes that would ever be made would be done through the European Council, which of course Ireland is a member of in the form of the Taoiseach. I accept absolutely Deputy Doherty's points in relation to things being done in a timely manner. And I've heard what you said about the phone call with Prime Minister May. Bear in mind that Cabinet meeting begins at 2. It may not yet finish by 5, so we'll just have to see how this plays out over the course of the day. And certainly what we want to be able to do is to give everyone the text, not just a briefing about the text. We actually want to give you the text. But I do remember the day when the German Parliament saw elements of our budget before our Parliament did. And that has to work both ways. We've had enormous support and solidarity from other EU member states and other EU institutions all along. And I don't want to be putting into the public domain documents that people in those parliaments haven't seen either. So it's really important this is all done at the same time and done from Brussels. There's one final thing I just want to say, and I really would like to put this on the record of the House. I know that for the unionist community in Northern Ireland at the moment, this is quite a difficult time. I know many of them may be feeling vulnerable, many of them may be feeling isolated, and many of them may be quite worried about what may be agreed in the coming days. And I want to say to them that the Good Friday Agreement will be protected, and that includes a recognition of the fact that we respect the territorial integrity of the United Kingdom and that we respect the principle of consent, that there can be no change to the constitutional status of Northern Ireland unless a majority of people in Northern Ireland say so. And we're very happy to have that written into any agreement, giving them that legal guarantee.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Claire Daly on behalf of Independents for Change.
Well, Taoiseach, I hope a deal is done, and I hope it means that a general election is imminent, because there are so many issues that are not benefiting from the present arrangements. And I want to deal with one, which is that of child protection. Now, as you know, over the weekend, Oberstown was again in the news with the revelation of the real reason why the Goleston-Hardwicke operational review, concluded almost 2 years ago, has never been published. Now, let's remember why this was commissioned in the first place. A whole number of serious incidents, a virtual riot by the young people, a major fire, €3.5 million worth of damage, strike action, health and safety concerns, behavioural management concerns. And it's worth pointing out that subsequent to the non-publication of this report, there were further serious incidents last year, including one which required the calling of the armed Gardaí, while this year, presently in the courts, we have High Court proceedings underway into the unlawful use of restraints and solitary confinement. And all of this in a facility which deals with the state's most vulnerable and troubled young people, over half of whom have lost one or both parents, 42% at serious risk, drug and drink problems, not going to school, in care and so on. So it's hardly surprising that the authors of the report said that they had grave concerns about what they learned and that it was in the public interest that the report should be published. And I have to say there's a sad irony that the Minister for Children justified non-publication on the grounds that she hadn't been convinced that fair procedures had applied. But fair procedures to who? It certainly wasn't fair to the children, many of whom got extended prison sentences of up to 5 years for their role in the disturbance, that the report of the circumstances leading up to the incident had not been published. It wasn't fair to Goleston and Hardwicke, consummate professionals who checked and rechecked, who to this day haven't been given legal information as to why the report hasn't been published. And I have to say, if they were academics based in Ireland, they wouldn't be treated like this. Instead, the beneficiaries of the fairness were the board and some of the staff in Oberstown, who threatened legal action and resignation. And they got away with it. They succeeded in intimidating the Department of Children. In other words, those responsible for the operation that was being reviewed blocked its publication. Sadly, this is not an isolated incident. This week, there was also revealed to me, we learned of the non-publication of another report involving very serious child protection concerns involving social work services in the Midlands. Taoiseach, I suppose my questions are quite straightforward. Can you give us an assurance that this review, commissioned for publication, will be published? And more importantly, I think, what are you going to do about the fact that there are now not one but two major organisations under the aegis of the Department of Children who it looks like are incredibly comfortable at giving the Minister and the Department the two fingers to carry on doing whatever they like, and sadly these two organisations are the ones that are charged with protecting our most vulnerable children. The report I referred to that was mentioned earlier in the week that we found out mightn't be published involved one young person in a serious harm situation where social workers had been notified over a period of 10 years.
Thank you, Deputy. Taoiseach.
Thanks very much, Deputy. As I think everyone in the House would appreciate, Oberstown works with and serves children who have very profound difficulties, children who've had a very bad start in life, children who have immense needs, great difficulties, children who are very often, sadly, a risk themselves and also risks to other people, their families and their communities. It's a very hard area to work in, and the staff who do work in that area, generally speaking, are very dedicated and have a vocation to work with children with such enormous and difficult needs. Several reports have been published, both outlining the reforms that are required at Oberstown, and also recommendations from these reports have been published and incorporated into the overall reform plan. And this reform plan is being limited. The Minister has the Board's legal advice with regard to this, and that has been accepted. And I'm sure in the course of this debate and perhaps another opportunity, Minister Pone will be able to answer your questions in a little bit more detail than I can now.